What about Bitcoin? Well, even JP Morgan, we're not fans of JP Morgan or any banks, right? But they say, well, Bitcoin's retail demand is going to remain strong ahead of the halving event. Well, it doesn't take a bank to say that for us to know that. We already knew that. We knew it way before the banks. Okay, but even JP Morgan saying, well, when the halving event comes, the Bitcoin production cost, this is interesting, and not a whole lot of people talk about it because it takes miners approximately 20,000 to create a Bitcoin right now. So they're still very profitable. But after the halving event, because the supply gets cut in half, so basically the number of Bitcoins the miners get cut in half, that means their production cost basically doubles to 40,000. Okay, so that means as we head towards the halving event, the price should catch up and exceed 40,000, right? That just makes sense. And every halving event, we see Bitcoin rise up to a certain percentage of the previous peak and then move forward, right? But that's from a miner's perspective. From a retail perspective, just looking at history, looking at the past 4-year cycles, this is how it's always been. And I don't expect any different this time around. Okay, let's recap. The SEC sues Binance, sues CZ, okay? 13 charges for security violations, okay? So obviously, not a good look. And this also relates to Binance.us. So, yeah, obviously causing a whole lot of scare because Binance is the biggest exchange in the world, and Binance.us is one of the biggest exchanges in the US, right? So obviously causing a lot of scare. But if you read through this, it's a lot more comprehensive than just going after Binance. SEC declared certain activities in crypto being securities, and also certain chains and coins also securities. According to the SEC, according to Gary Gensler, he believes CZ commingled funds also has too much ownership in Binance and Binance.us, and he believes that BNB and also BUSD are both securities in which Binance sold. So there's a lot to digest here. But what's interesting is this. This is like the ownership structure. According to the SEC, that CZ himself on top owns CMC, which they paid enormous amount for, and then all these other companies. One, Binance Holding Limited, which is owned by him. And he's saying, they're saying 100%. Okay, first of all, CZ has investors. There's other people involved. So you can't just say CZ owns 100% of all these, right? And then it goes down and breaks down that CZ owns the company 100%, that owns 81% of BAM Trading Service, which is Binance.us. So only 19% is owned by seed investors and other people. You know, I just don't believe that CZ himself on top there, the 5 companies, is owned 100% by CZ. That just doesn't even make any sense. Okay, it's not like CZ took it out of his pocket and just bought everything. He has investors too, right? So first of all, that map doesn't even make a lot of sense. And everything else that basically Gary and SEC declared unproven. They're alleged, okay? Here's the thing. Just because the SEC sues doesn't mean that it's factual. Doesn't mean that it's law. Most of this comes from supposedly insiders that said that CZ did this and did that and did this. They're disgruntled employees. Of course, they would say bad things, right? Again, supposedly from an ex-Binance employee, and somehow it's factual. So if someone ever gets fired and they say something, it must be true according to the SEC. This is a Wyckoff pattern. And, this mustache guy, who actually does a lot of good charts, he's been following this since December 2022. And, you know, Wyckoff, this pattern was popularized around, I think it was popularized in around 2020, but it wasn't really applied to Bitcoin for a long time until it was. But the Wyckoff pattern, in case you're not familiar, is a way for whales to fake out everyone, the general public, and then get in, okay? They get in low, and then they ride the thing back up. And if you look at it, if you look at this pattern and look at what Bitcoin has done, I mean, since 2021, I mean, it's like almost identical, right? Like it followed the pattern almost identically. And it's just really interesting. And again, what's the whole point of this? The point is to drive it to a point where they can accumulate and then start riding it back up, right? Obviously, we had a long stint under 20,000, right? We had a long stint around 15, 18s, right? But now we're climbing back up. And if we are following this pattern, the next leg up will bring us into the 40s and 50s. So again, is that coming in July? Many people have predicted we will see a huge rise in July due to fractal patterns, due to signals, and this is one of them. Wyckoff pattern means we are following it. Again, and if we do follow it, and we do see 40 or 50Ks in July, well, then it's no coincidence, right? It does show you that there are some whales out there or market makers that have been playing the retail people for a long time. And basically, this is a game of accumulation. And here's one that shows you the whales, what they do. You know, whales sell at top and then they buy at bottom, right? So this is a number of addresses with over 10,000 Bitcoin. 10,000 Bitcoin. You can see when Bitcoin peaked, guess what happened? They started selling. They started selling into the rally, right? But then once Bitcoin started coming down, guess what? They started buying. There was a huge number of accumulation. Look at that. Look at that pump of addresses right around when Bitcoin dropped to 15,000. That's actually when most of them loaded up. Again, you can't, it's clear, right? This is what the whales do. They accumulate when the market's down and then they sell when the market's up. It's really that simple. So don't be fooled out. Don't be faked out. Don't be fooled by what they're doing. All right, last few points. Well, no, not that one. This one, unfortunately, one of the big exchanges in the U.S., Binance.US, is getting cut off. From who? From the banking system. So they sent a tweet yesterday basically saying that they have been warned by their banking partners, that they don't want to do business with Binance.US anymore. So unfortunately, that means once they end their relationship, which could be coming as soon as June 13th, Binance.US will be pure crypto, meaning there will be no more fiat on-ramp or fiat off-ramp. Okay, doesn't mean that the exchange is shutting down. You could still deposit and withdraw using crypto, using Tether, using USDC, but the fiat part is getting cut off. So we're starting to see this now, and people have asked about this for a long time. Like, what if the U.S., right? What if all the banks cut off their fiat on-ramp, off-ramp? Unfortunately, it's going to come eventually, but just hoping it wasn't this soon, right? So that's the latest news. And this is, of course, due to Gary Gensler, right? This could be part of the plan all along. Even though he knew that at the time of filing that there was no way he was going to win against Binance or Coinbase, he's putting at least pressure on them and maybe putting pressure on the banks, or maybe helping the banks do this. So because maybe banks were getting worried And banks went up to Gary and said, hey, you need to do something. We are losing to these guys, right? Help us in some way. That actually makes more sense. Well, keep in mind, Gary worked at Goldman Sachs for decades, okay? So maybe this gives them a reason to say, okay, we're cutting off. Otherwise, there were no reasons before. So that's the latest, unfortunately. So if you are using Binance US, I am, right? Just know that fiat on-ramp, off-ramp will be cut off by June 13th. So if you do need to move USD off of it, you probably need to do so right away. But afterwards, the exchange will still operate as normal. You can still withdraw if you wanted to, right? It's just a fiat portion. But still, that's a huge portion, and it sucks. As far as I know, the other exchanges in the US, like Coinbase, Gemini, Kraken, their fiat system is still okay. But if the banks are looking for an excuse to cut off, this is the best excuse they have. So hopefully it doesn't move to the other exchanges in the US.